He thought no one would notice, a quick jab at a black teen on the stand. But when the gavel dropped, the man in robes wasn't just a judge. He was the boy's father. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor said, voice even, deliberate. "Jalen Cross," the boy replied, his voice tight. "Speak clearly, please." Jalen adjusted the microphone, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Jalen Cross." His tone was steadier now, though his hands gripped the wooden edge of the witness stand hard enough for his knuckles to pale. From the defense table, Officer Clint Rourke leaned back, arms folded. His uniform jacket was pressed crisp, his badge catching light from the window like a blade. He studied the boy with a look that wasn't curiosity, it was calculation. The courtroom air was tense, as if every breath depended on what came next. Reporters in the back row barely dared to shift their weight. The prosecutor, Thomas Weller, began pacing, voice carrying easily. "Jalen, could you describe, in your own words, what happened on the night of March 17th? Jalen's mouth went dry. He stared at his reflection in the polished surface of the microphone. "I was walking home from the youth center. It was around 9:30. I heard sirens. Next thing I knew, someone shouted, 'Get down!' His chest rose and fell faster now. Before I could even turn around, someone grabbed me from behind and slammed me into a police car. Do you see that person in the courtroom today?" Jalen hesitated. Then he turned, slowly, deliberately. His finger lifted. Yes, it was him. Every head turned toward Rourke. The officer didn't blink. He only smirked faintly, as though this was a game he'd played before. "Let the record show," the prosecutor said. "The witness has identified Officer Clint Rourke." Rourke's attorney scribbled something on a notepad, pretending calm. But Jalen could feel his gaze pressing against him like heat. He looked away toward the judge's bench, toward Judge Malcolm Cross, who sat motionless, gavel resting lightly in his hand. His expression was carved from stone, but something about his stillness carried a weight Jalen could feel even from across the room. The prosecutor leaned closer. "Jalen, did Officer Rourke say anything to you during this encounter?" Jalen hesitated. "He said," his voice wavered. "He said, 'You fit the description.' I asked what description. He said, 'You know what I mean.'" A low murmur spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor raised a hand. Quiet in the gallery. Jalen drew a shallow breath. He could feel every pair of eyes drilling into him. His shirt clung to his back with sweat. Then came the moment he would remember forever. He reached for the evidence packet beside him, a stack of photos from that night, his wrists bruised from the handcuffs. The folder slipped slightly as he tried to pass it to the bailiff. At that same instant, Rourke rose from his seat. The officer's steps were unhurried, casual, as if stretching his legs. He brushed past the witness stand, too close, a sudden deliberate movement, a sharp jab to Jalen's ribs. Jalen froze, his mouth opened, but no sound came. The pain was quick, controlled, almost invisible. Only the bailiff, Harris, an older man with gray at his temples, caught the flicker of motion. His hand twitched toward his belt. Rourke's whisper followed like poison. "Watch your mouth, boy." Jalen's eyes widened. He felt the sting in his side and something colder in his chest. Humiliation. He forced himself upright, refusing to give the officer the satisfaction of seeing him fold. "Order!" Judge Cross barked suddenly, the gavel cracking like thunder. The sound startled even Rourke, who turned his head with a mild frown. "Your Honor?" Rourke's lawyer rose quickly, pretending confusion. "My client was simply—" "Sit down," the judge said. His tone was quiet but razor-sharp. The lawyer obeyed. The tension in the room was thick enough to hum. The jurors looked at one another. Some had seen it, others weren't sure. But everyone felt something had happened. Something wrong. The prosecutor's voice was careful now. "Your Honor, might we request a short recess?" Judge Cross stared at Jalen, then at Rourke. The faintest muscle in his jaw flexed. "Granted," he said at last. 10 minutes. The gavel fell again. As the room emptied, the noise outside, reporters, whispers, the shuffle of shoes, felt far away, drowned beneath the steady drum of Jalen's heartbeat. He clutched his ribs, fingers brushing against the tender spot. Harris, the bailiff, approached quietly. "You all right, son?" Jalen nodded quickly. "Yeah, I'm fine," but his voice betrayed him. You sure that's what you want to tell the court? Harris asked. Jalen hesitated. If he said what happened, they'd say he made it up, that he was too emotional, that he misinterpreted contact. He'd seen it happen before to others who tried to speak. I just want this to be over, Jalen murmured. Across the room, Rourke lingered by the defense table, straightening his tie. The smirk was back, a small, almost imperceptible look that said, untouchable. But Rourke didn't see the judge watching him through the narrow slit of the chamber door. Inside the judge's chambers, Malcolm Cross's hand trembled as he set his glasses down on the desk. His breath came slow and heavy, his pulse pounding behind his ribs. He could still see it, the movement, subtle but cruel. His own son, his courtroom, his law, mocked right before him. He pressed his palms together, eyes closed. The oath he had taken years ago whispered in his mind like a warning, impartiality above all. But how does a man stay impartial when justice bleeds through his own child's silence? He looked up at the clock. 10 minutes. 10 minutes before he had to return and act as though none of this pierced him. Sir? The clerk knocked lightly on the door. Should we address the incident? Malcolm's voice was calm, too calm. Not yet. Review the surveillance footage from the main floor camera. Quietly, the clerk blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. The overhead one? Yes. Bring it to me when you have it. When the clerk left, Malcolm stood alone, staring at his reflection in the small mirror above the sink. The robe made him look powerful, but inside he felt something raw and human clawing for air. He remembered Jalen as a child, building model planes at the kitchen table, eyes bright with wonder. He'd taught him to stand tall, to speak truth. Now that same truth had been struck, right in front of him, by the very institution he swore to defend, and he couldn't show it. Not yet. Back in the courtroom, the recess ended. Jalen took his place again. His ribs still ached, but he sat straighter now. The jurors avoided eye contact. A few looked sympathetic, others unreadable. The prosecutor approached the stand with visible caution, knowing something had shifted in the air. Jalen, he said gently, would you like some water before we continue? I'm fine, Jalen said. He wasn't fine, but he was tired of being handled like glass. All right, the prosecutor said softly. Let's move forward. From the bench, Malcolm watched every twitch of Rourke's face, every smug flicker of control. It was a dangerous silence, the kind that holds an explosion inside it. Then, without warning, a commotion erupted near the back. One of the jurors dropped a pen, startling the gallery. The sudden noise made Jalen flinch. For just an instant, everyone saw it, the way he winced, hand brushing instinctively against his ribs. The room quieted again, but the damage was done. The prosecutor's brow furrowed. The jurors exchanged glances. A camera from the local station zoomed in, capturing the exact moment of discomfort. Malcolm's eyes darkened. He tapped the gavel once. Let's proceed, he said coldly. But inside, the storm had already begun. He caught sight of Harris whispering to the clerk. No doubt about the camera footage. And when Harris nodded discreetly, Malcolm knew it was there. Proof. The prosecutor continued questioning, but Jalen's focus drifted. His ribs burned, but worse was the heat of humiliation. The knowledge that everyone had seen something, but no one would say it aloud. Rourke sat stone-faced now, one leg crossed over the other, as if the whole thing bored him. His lawyer leaned in occasionally, whispering something that made him grin faintly. Jalen's hand trembled as he pointed at the body cam still image displayed on the projector. That's when he said I was resisting. The image showed Jalen pinned, cheek pressed to the hood of the car, eyes wide in fear. Was this before or after you complied with his order to stop? After, Jalen said quietly. The jury murmured again. Rourke's smirk returned. He leaned back in his chair, gaze locked on the boy. To him, this was just another case to bury, another kid's word against a badge. But in that moment, Judge Cross realized something else, a faint pattern behind Rourke's confidence. That officer had done this before, maybe not in a courtroom, but in life. The arrogance wasn't learned overnight. It was protected. As Jalen finished his testimony, the tension felt unbearable. Malcolm dismissed the jury for the day, his voice steady but stripped of warmth. The gallery emptied. Outside, the courthouse buzzed like a live wire. Reporters gathered, whispering about an odd exchange during testimony. The footage hadn't leaked yet, but whispers travel faster than rules. Malcolm watched from his window as his son stepped outside, flanked by Marcus Dell, the young defense attorney who'd volunteered for the case. Jalen's head was down, hands in pockets. Rourke exited minutes later through another door, grinning for cameras. In that quiet, Malcolm realized the truth. The law could bend to power, but not forever. He turned to the sealed monitor where the surveillance still glowed faintly on the paused screen. Rourke's elbow, Jalen's flinch, the evidence that could topple everything. The judge's reflection stared back at him, divided between father and magistrate. He knew that line could never hold for long. And as the courthouse lights dimmed, he whispered to no one, "You just made the worst mistake of your life, officer." But Rourke hadn't realized one thing. The man presiding over this trial, Judge Malcolm Cross, wasn't just another robed official. He was Jalen's father, and while Malcolm had kept that fact private to avoid conflict of interest, his knuckles whitened as he watched the footage replay in his mind, the grainy body cam, the rough arrest, the trembling teenager. For a fraction of a second, his mask cracked. Jalen caught his father's eyes and saw something flicker there, an emotion between rage and restraint. The courtroom buzzed. The prosecutor whispered for a recess. Reporters began typing furiously, unaware that the true explosion hadn't even started yet. Rourke straightened his tie, oblivious to the storm forming behind the judge's cold stare. He thought he had silenced a witness. Instead, he had just awakened a sleeping lion. "Jalen, wait up!" Marcus Dell called, jogging to catch him before he reached the courthouse doors. His brown briefcase bumped against his leg as he fell in beside the boy. "You okay?" Jalen didn't answer right away. His jaw worked silently, his eyes fixed on the tile floor that shimmered beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. The echo of murmuring reporters filled the hallway like static. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and restrained. "He hit me in front of everyone." Marcus slowed, scanning the passing faces of clerks and deputies who avoided looking at them. "I know," he said, "and people saw it. That's what matters." Jalen's hand pressed against his side, wincing slightly. "Doesn't feel like it matters." The words stung because Marcus didn't have an answer. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. From somewhere down the hall came a burst of camera shutters, reporters trying to get a glimpse of the young witness everyone was whispering about. A security guard blocked their path, nodding toward a side exit. "This way," he said quietly. "Judge's orders." As they slipped through the narrow doorway, Marcus looked back toward the heavy double doors of the courtroom. Inside, the judge's bench stood empty, but Judge Malcolm Cross was still there, behind those walls, in chambers, holding together the last threads of composure he had left. Inside his chambers, the air felt too still, too heavy. The blinds were half drawn, slicing daylight into thin bars across the desk. Malcolm sat in silence for a long moment before removing his glasses and setting them beside a stack of folders. His fingertips brushed his temple as if the act might calm the storm building behind his eyes. "Sir?" His clerk, Alan Price, stood at the doorway holding a notepad. "We've had multiple jurors report the incident. 2 mentioned seeing deliberate contact. 1 used the phrase—" "I read it," Malcolm interrupted, his voice even but tight. "Intimidation in plain sight." Alan hesitated, unsure whether to speak again. "What should we do, Your Honor?" The prosecutors waiting for direction, Malcolm exhaled slowly, forcing the tremor from his hands. "Bring me the courtroom surveillance footage," he said finally. "Camera 2. The overhead angle, Alan blinked. "Now?" "Yes, now." As the clerk disappeared down the hall, Malcolm leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if the answer might be written there. He had spent decades cultivating discipline, knowing when to show empathy, when to mask it, but today, that discipline had turned against him. Every second of restraint now felt like betrayal. The door opened again, and Alan entered with a laptop. "Loaded and queued," he said. Malcolm gestured to the desk. "Play it." The video began. Grainy, silent footage of the courtroom from above. There was Jalen at the stand, posture stiff, voice lost to the mute playback. Then, in one brief flicker of motion, Rourke leaned forward, his elbow connected. Jalen's body jolted almost imperceptibly, but enough. The judge didn't flinch watching it. He only stared, expression locked between fury and disbelief. When the footage ended, Malcolm spoke quietly. "Seal this for now. No leaks. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Allen hesitated before closing the laptop. "Your Honor, if this gets out, it'll be everywhere by tomorrow." Malcolm looked at him, eyes sharp. "Then let's make sure it doesn't." But fate, as he would soon learn, does not take orders. By evening, whispers had evolved into rumors and rumors into headlines. A freelance journalist named Evan Rice, who had been sitting in the back of the gallery, posted a still frame from the footage on social media. The caption read, "Officer assaults witness during live trial." Within an hour, the image went viral, retweeted by activists, reporters, even a senator's aide. By the time the courthouse lights dimmed, the story had reached every news outlet in the state. At home, Jalen sat on the living room couch, knees drawn to his chest. The television across the room displayed his own face in a split screen next to Rourke's. Beneath it, a banner scrolled endlessly. "Courtroom scandal. Officer accused of striking teen witness." Marcus stood near the doorway, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I've seen it," he said. "No, we didn't leak it." Someone in the gallery must have recorded the feed. His tone was clipped, defensive. "Look, just tell the press we're not commenting tonight." He hung up and rubbed his temples. Jalen looked up at him. "They're saying I provoked him." Marcus glanced at the screen, where a pundit speculated about context and misinterpretation. His jaw tightened. "Let them talk," he said. "The truth's on tape." Jalen gave a hollow laugh. "Yeah? Since when has that stopped anyone?" The remark silenced Marcus. Across the room, the faint creak of a floorboard signaled Malcolm's presence. He stood in the doorway, robe removed, the weight of the day pressing down like gravity. "Turn that off," he said quietly. Jalen obeyed, the screen going dark. The silence that followed was thicker than any argument. Malcolm stepped closer, his voice measured but distant. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be worse." Jalen's eyes flicked to his father's. "Worse than being hit in your courtroom?" The words landed like a punch. Malcolm didn't respond immediately. "Justice will handle this," he said finally. Jalen shook his head. "Justice? You mean the same system that let him do it in the first place?" He stood up, emotion cracking through the careful control he'd held all day. "You're not supposed to protect me, Dad. You're supposed to protect justice." For the first time that night, Malcolm's composure faltered. The boy's words cut deeper than he'd expected. He didn't try to argue. Instead, he turned away, hand gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. "Go to bed, Jalen," he said quietly. Jalen lingered for a moment, then walked upstairs without another word. The faint sound of his bedroom door closing echoed through the house like the gavel he'd dropped too softly. Malcolm sat alone in his study long after midnight. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. He stared at an old file spread open on the desk, one he hadn't touched in years. Across the top, Rourke, Clint A., disciplinary record. He flipped through the pages slowly. 2 excessive force complaints. 1 dismissed for insufficient evidence. Another buried under a note from a captain. Resolved internally. Each entry was neat, official, and hollow, but buried near the back was something else. A signed statement from a rookie officer dated 6 years ago, claiming Rourke regularly escalated encounters to provoke resistance. The signature was redacted. The officer's name, blacked out. Malcolm's breath caught. He turned another page. Emails between district administrators, all stamped confidential. Words like avoid scrutiny and maintain optics stood out like warnings. He realized then that this wasn't negligence. It was protection. A chain of silence stretching farther than he'd ever imagined. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You've seen too much, Judge. Stay quiet." He stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering over the screen. Then he deleted it. But the chill in his veins remained. The next morning, the courthouse was surrounded by reporters. Protesters stood behind metal barricades holding signs that read, "Truth has bruises" and "Accountability for all." Rourke's defense team arrived early, cameras flashing as they walked up the steps. The officer himself kept his head high, expression unreadable. Inside, Marcus met with Malcolm in chambers. "The footage leak's been confirmed," he said. "Came from a freelance source, not an internal feed." Malcolm frowned. "Then someone copied it before we sealed it." "Someone with access," Marcus said meaningfully. Their eyes met for a tense second before Malcolm looked away. "Find out who." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, with all respect, you should recuse yourself." "They're already saying this case is compromised," Malcolm's voice sharpened. "If I recuse myself now, Rourke walks free." "You think anyone else will hold him accountable?" Marcus swallowed. "They'll come after you." "I know." He leaned against his desk, staring out the narrow window at the sea of reporters below. "But if they think fear will silence me, they've learned nothing from today." A sharp knock interrupted them. Allen stepped in, pale and uneasy. "Sir, the federal board has requested a preliminary review of your conduct. They'll expect a statement by noon." Marcus exhaled slowly. "It's starting." Malcolm nodded. "Then we'll give them one worth reading." That night, long after the courthouse emptied, Malcolm sat alone again in the same room. His robe hung on the wall behind him like a shadow. He opened the disciplinary file once more, tracing his finger over the names of men who had looked away. Captain V. Henderson. Chief A. Miller. Internal Affairs. Sealed Report, 2018. He turned to his computer and began typing, a confidential memo addressed to the Department of Justice, attaching every document he could find. His cursor hovered over the send button. His mind wavered between father and judge, fear and fury. Then he pressed send. Outside, a storm rolled in, rain striking the courthouse windows with relentless rhythm. It was almost poetic, he thought, cleansing, violent, necessary. Upstairs, Jalen stood at the window, watching lightning flash across the city skyline. He didn't know his father had just crossed a line no one could uncross. But somehow he felt it, a shift in the air like something enormous had begun to move. Downstairs, Malcolm's phone buzzed again. Another message from an unknown number. "We warned you. There will be consequences." He looked at it without fear this time, just resolve. Because now, for the first time, he understood what he was truly fighting. He realized then this wasn't just about one cop's temper. It was about a system that believed it could bruise truth in daylight and walk away untouched. The gavel's echo still lingered in the air when Malcolm Cross rose from his chair. "Bring in the jury," he said calmly, though his pulse drummed like a distant march. Outside the courthouse, the storm had already begun. Hundreds gathered behind police tape, chanting Jalen's name, flashing posters at news cameras. Inside, tension wrapped around every word like wire. The sound of chairs shifting filled the courtroom, and the air conditioner's low hum felt like a whisper before thunder. Rourke stood at the defense table, his uniform crisp, his chin lifted in defiance. His attorney, Leon Kettner, leaned close and whispered, "Don't react. You'll make it worse." Rourke's jaw flexed, but he didn't respond. He just stared straight ahead, toward the bench, toward the man who now had both power and personal stakes in his hands. Jalen sat quietly in the witness row, bruising faint under his collar. He kept his eyes low, tracing invisible lines on the wood grain of the table, but he could feel every gaze pressing into him, the jurors, the press, the man who had once slammed him into cold steel. Then, suddenly, his father's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Before we proceed," Judge Cross said, his tone even but colder than frost, "this court must address an act committed during testimony yesterday." A wave of movement rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked. The stenographer hesitated, then resumed typing. "Objection!" Kettner barked. "Your Honor, this is irregular procedure. We request a sidebar." Malcolm didn't blink. "Request denied." Silence. He turned toward the clerk. "Play the tape." The screen lowered behind him, flickering with static. The hum of the speakers filled the chamber. Every heartbeat in that room seemed to pause. The footage began, blurry at first, then focused on the crucial moment. Jalen reaching for a document. Rourke leaning forward, the elbow striking just above the ribs, the wince, the subtle recoil. and then faint but unmistakable. Rourke's mutter, "Watch your mouth, boy!" A gasp cut through the gallery. Jalen closed his eyes. He had lived that moment twice already, once in real time, once in memory. But now, watching it before strangers, it felt heavier, colder, like truth itself was bleeding onto the screen. Malcolm leaned forward, voice steady as a drawn sword. "This," he said, each word deliberate, "is contempt against this court and against the principles of law." The sound that followed wasn't applause, wasn't outrage. It was silence, thick, stunned silence that seemed to weigh down the air itself. Rourke finally broke it with a scoff. "You're out of line, Your Honor." The bailiff took a single step forward, hand instinctively near his belt. Malcolm's expression didn't change. "You will refrain from speaking unless addressed." Kettner stood, waving a legal pad. "Your Honor, this is a personal attack. Given the rumors surrounding your relationship to the witness, this proceeding is compromised." "We move for immediate recusal." Malcolm's gaze flickered briefly toward his son, just long enough for the room to sense something unspoken. Then he turned back, his voice carrying both weariness and fire. "Yes," he said, "the witness is my son. And I withheld that to ensure fairness. But when justice is attacked in my courtroom, family or not, I will not stand silent." A shockwave moved through the room. Reporters bolted upright. The chief of police, seated in the back row, frowned deeply, whispering to an aide. Kettner looked stunned. "You admit it?" "I state it," Malcolm replied, "because truth must live here, even when it costs." Rourke's smirk faltered for the first time. The self-assured gleam in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something else. Recognition, maybe even fear. The kind of fear that blooms when arrogance meets its limit. Malcolm turned toward the bailiff. "Officer Rourke, you are hereby remanded into custody pending review for assault, intimidation, and obstruction." The words dropped like stones. The bailiff hesitated. Everyone knew he'd worked alongside Rourke for years. Same precinct, same nights on patrol before he took a court post. His fingers tightened slightly before he stepped forward. "Stand up," he said quietly. Rourke didn't move. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Then Jalen heard the sound, metallic, final, the click of handcuffs locking shut. Outside, the crowd erupted as word spread through text messages and live tweets. Officer Rourke arrested in open court. The chants grew louder, echoing against the courthouse glass. Inside, Jalen's chest trembled, not from fear, but from a strange mixture of vindication and grief. His father dismissed the jury for the day. "You are excused until further instruction," Malcolm said, voice softer now, but still weighted. "This court stands adjourned." He slammed the gavel once, the sound ricocheting across the marble like a gunshot. As the spectators poured out, the chief of police made his way to the bench. "Malcolm," he began carefully, "you've made this very complicated." "Justice usually is," Malcolm replied without looking up. "You've set a precedent that'll haunt us all." A sitting judge arresting an active duty officer. "Do you realize the chain reaction that'll cause?" Malcolm removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I didn't start this chain, Dennis." He did. When he thought a badge was armor for cruelty, the chief's tone hardened. "You've humiliated my department. You've humiliated the city. Then clean it," Malcolm snapped quietly. "Instead of defending the stain." The chief exhaled slowly, realizing words wouldn't reach him now. "You're going to regret this." "I already do," Malcolm murmured, and stood. Across the aisle, Jalen caught his father's eye again. For the first time in years, the man behind the robe looked human. Not just a symbol of authority, but a father weighed by impossible choices. Jalen approached him hesitantly. "Dad," he said quietly, "they're going to come after you, aren't they?" Malcolm didn't answer at first. He looked at his son's bruised ribs, at the quiet strength it took for him to stand in front of a courtroom full of strangers. Then he placed a hand on Jalen's shoulder. "They can come for me," he said softly. "But they can't come for the truth." Jalen nodded slowly, though his throat felt tight. "You did the right thing." "Right things," Malcolm said, looking toward the door where Rourke had been led away, "rarely come without a price." The father and son stood there for a long moment as the courtroom emptied, leaving only the echo of footsteps and the faint clatter of media equipment being packed away. Outside, the sky had darkened with late afternoon clouds. The sound of distant thunder rumbled, a storm that felt eerily fitting. As Malcolm reached for his coat, his phone buzzed. A private message flashed across the screen. Unknown number. You've made powerful enemies. Expect consequences. He froze, thumb hovering above the screen. The chill that ran through him wasn't fear. It was certainty. A line had been crossed, and there was no going back. He glanced once more at Jalen, who was watching him, waiting for reassurance that wouldn't come. Malcolm pocketed the phone, exhaling slowly. The story was far from over. Rain fell steadily outside the courthouse the next morning, turning the marble steps slick and gray. Reporters gathered beneath umbrellas, their lenses glistening like watchful eyes. Inside, Judge Malcolm Cross sat alone in his chambers, reading the notice that would decide his future. The envelope bore the seal of the State Judicial Review Board. His fingers hesitated before breaking it open. "Dad?" Jalen's voice came from the doorway. He'd grown quieter these past few weeks, his confidence tempered by the spotlight that had followed him since the hearing. Cameras waited outside their home now. Teachers avoided eye contact. Strangers whispered his name like a headline. Malcolm folded the letter, unread for the moment. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "I had to see it," Jalen replied, "whatever it says." Malcolm looked up then, at the bruise that had long since faded from his son's ribs, and at the steadiness in his gaze. The boy he'd tried to shield was now someone unshakable. "They're reviewing my conduct," Malcolm said finally. "Conflict of interest. They'll decide if I stay or if I fall with him." Jalen nodded slowly. "If doing what's right costs your robe, then maybe it's worth it." The words lingered in the air, carrying both pride and pain. Malcolm smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed the fatigue of a man standing at the edge of his career. "Your grandfather used to say justice has two faces, mercy and courage. Most men can only afford one." Before Jalen could respond, the intercom buzzed. "Judge Cross," the clerk's voice came through, hesitant. "There's press waiting in the lobby. They say it's about the leaked federal review." Malcolm frowned. "Federal?" "Yes, sir. Department of Justice." He exchanged a glance with Jalen. The review had been state-run until now. The DOJ stepping in meant one thing. The case had grown beyond the courthouse walls. By noon, the building was swarming with cameras and officials in tailored suits. The chief of police arrived first, his expression tight. Behind him came two men from the Department of Justice, Deputy Marshal Stephen Hall and Special Counsel Raymond Locke. Both carried the calm authority of men accustomed to disruption. "Judge Cross," Hall said, extending a hand, "we've begun an inquiry into the handling of Officer Rourke's prior cases. Your actions last week drew our attention." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "My actions?" "Yes," Locke replied, setting down a thick folder. "You may not realize the precedent you set. Officers across 3 precincts have come forward since your hearing. Similar incidents, intimidation in court, witness interference, even tampering with transcripts." Jalen's heart skipped. "They're saying it's all connected?" Locke glanced at him briefly. "Son, what your father exposed might just open every sealed door in this state." The chief interjected sharply. "With all due respect, this circus is already tearing the department apart. Rourke acted alone." "Did he?" Malcolm's voice cut through the air like steel. He reached for a drawer, pulled out a flash drive, and slid it across the table. "Those are sealed affidavits from past hearings. Officers disciplined, then quietly reassigned. Witnesses pressured into silence. I backed up every file before the leak. You'll find patterns there, same precinct, same oversight board, same names approving them." The chief's face drained of color. Locke nodded, taking the drive. "You knew this might happen?" "I knew truth always does," Malcolm said quietly. Outside, thunder rolled again. The storm hadn't let up all day, as if the city itself was cleansing something buried. That night, news networks played the footage of the elbow for the 100th time. But this time, it was spliced beside statements from other victims, officers' testimonies, and documents leaked from internal police servers. A national debate had erupted, some calling Malcolm a symbol of integrity, others branding him reckless. Talk shows dissected his ethics. Protesters and defenders stood side by side in the rain, holding signs that read, "No justice without courage," and "Judges aren't gods." At home, Jalen sat in the darkened living room, watching the flicker of the television reflect across his face. Malcolm entered quietly, setting down a tray with 2 cups of coffee. "They're calling you a hero," Jalen murmured without looking away. Malcolm shook his head. "Heroes are people who make it out whole. I'm just waiting to see what's left. You did what no one else would." "I did what every judge promises," Malcolm said. "The only difference is, people finally noticed." There was a brief silence. The rain tapped against the window like faint applause. Then Jalen spoke again softly. "I think he knew who you were that day." Malcolm turned. "Who?" "Rourke. When he hit me. He looked at you before he did it, like he wanted to prove something." Malcolm's hand froze around his cup. That thought had haunted him too, in quiet moments. Rourke's eyes darting toward the bench, the calculated cruelty in the blow. It hadn't been impulsive, it had been provocation. Before he could answer, his phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown contact. "Federal Ethics Committee decision released. Urgent." He stood. "It's time." The next morning, the courthouse was packed to capacity. Journalists lined the aisles, microphones poised. The walls seemed to hum with tension. Malcolm walked in through the side entrance, his robe folded over his arm. He wasn't sure he'd wear it again. Jalen followed a few steps behind, flanked by Marcus Dell, the attorney who had first believed him. At the center dais sat the 5 members of the Judicial Ethics Committee, faces unreadable. The chairman cleared his throat. After full review of the events surrounding Officer Clint Rourke's trial and subsequent actions by presiding Judge Malcolm Cross, Jalen gripped the bench edge. This panel finds no misconduct. Judge Cross acted within the bounds of judicial ethics and in defense of court integrity. The room erupted. Cameras flashed like lightning. The chairman continued, his voice rising above the noise. "Furthermore, this committee recognizes Judge Cross for maintaining impartiality under extraordinary pressure. Effective immediately, all restrictions on his docket are lifted." Jalen felt the air rush from his lungs. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, relief crossing his features, but not pride. Only the heavy release of a burden finally set down. Across the room, however, Rourke's attorney was already on his feet, shouting above the crowd. "We demand a mistrial, emotional bias, manipulated evidence." The chairman pounded the table. "Denied. The Department of Justice has confirmed an independent investigation. Officer Rourke will stand trial on charges of assault, intimidation, and evidence tampering." Rourke, seated between 2 guards, looked pale. His once arrogant expression was gone, replaced by something hollow. For the first time, Jalen didn't look away. Their eyes met, and it was Rourke who dropped his gaze first. Days later, in the final hearing, Jalen stood again at the witness stand. No cameras this time, just quiet, respectful stillness. The prosecutor asked if he wished to say anything before sentencing. Jalen glanced toward his father, who sat silently among the audience, his hands folded. "I didn't ask for any of this," Jalen began. His voice wavered once, then steadied. "But I learned something. Justice isn't about staying quiet to look strong. It's about speaking up even when your voice shakes." The words hung in the air. The judge at this trial, a colleague of Malcolm's, nodded once. "Thank you, Mr. Cross." Malcolm placed a hand on Jalen's shoulder. "You did well, Jalen." Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of racial prejudice, extreme police brutality in a house of justice, and the severe consequences of violence against a minor. This narrative aims to highlight the importance of dignity and accountability, showing that professional status should never be used to commit assault.